Hi there. Welcome to another Razorback screencast. In this one, we're just going to continue UV mapping the arms, and we're going to focus on this object right here. So this object is one of our first really tricky ones. We have a smooth transition going in multiple directions right here. We have sort of a mechanical cylindrical piece here. This arm curves in many dimensions. And then we have sort of this seamless cap over here. So I've been thinking about this, and I'd like to try a few different approaches. One thing I do know for sure is that I don't mind there being a seam right here, where those polygons are. So we can sort of cylindrically map this part, allow there to be a seam there, and then sort of start unwrapping the rest of the polygons coming down this way. In terms of the seams on the arm itself, I'm okay with the seams being back here. So if I were to select those, sort of running in this direction, both there and there. So I'm okay if this part sort of peels away. But let's see what we can do with this. I'm up for some experimentation here. So the first thing I'll do is identify my object and apply my test pattern. Now we can see that it already has a UV map there and it's pretty messed up. We don't need that, we can just get rid of it. We can change this to cylindrical mapping. And then with both of these selected, we go to the texture view. We can sort of zoom out. We can scale our texture down a little bit. And we sort of see where it comes from. And then we just rotate it into place. It just so happens that we have a rigid sort of source for our axis right there. So we can start by using that. So I just realized my mouse is limiting at the edge of my screen. So what I'm going to do is edit my preferences. Over here under input devices, I'm going to uncheck graphics tablet. There we go. So we can now sort of see all around, and we can see that that's a pretty dead-on map. So let's just start by selecting those polygons and assigning UV coordinates. So I'm just going to use the fill selection tool to select all the polygons around the back, just like that. And then I'm going to look at where my seam is going to be. So right now it looks like it would be down here. Prefer it sort of on the inside like that. So just rotate it and then go up to tags, assign UV coordinates, and if we go to our UV view, we can see we have this unwrapped cylinder. Now we can still benefit from relaxing this a bit, so let's do that. So as we applied it, it sort of bent a little bit. That happens sometimes, and if you don't mind it, you can leave it alone. There are a few ways to sort of battle it. I think if you say pin border points, it gives you a more interesting result here. And then what you can do is you can sort of select the polygons that you want to sort of apply it to, and then just apply it incrementally. But in general, it's kind of a dicey operation. If you want to do this manually, you can do it pretty manually as well. In my case, I'm just going to apply it, see what I get. Well, let's see if we can get a little creative with this. What if we deselected a couple of these? we see it pins those to their neighbors, completely warps everything else. I believe Maya has a feature where you can only relax on the U or only relax on the V. That would be really convenient right about now. But in a case like this, where I usually have a really precise situation and I want to make sure that the points unwrap precisely, is maybe I'll just select some of the polygons and unwrap it that way, and then select some of the others, like over here, and unwrap it like that. So like things have been relaxed here. It's kind of hard to see, but you just don't do them all at once, and you can get sort of a less intense result. You can see here the edges still got kind of funny, but now most everything is at the right scale. But as you can see, as you start to relax more parts of it, it kind of wants to curl on itself. So you can just leave it like this, and what I do sometimes is, like, everything here looks nice and straight except these pieces at the end. So I'll just select those, and then let's see, there's two different scale tools. I believe there's scale and there's non-uniform scale. I think I have a shortcut for that, PN for non-uniform, so that would allow me to just scale it vertically. And so that's not going to be a perfect 100% relaxed UV, but as you can see here, it's good enough. So 4, 5, 6, 7, it's running the right direction. So we can just leave that alone. Which brings me to this cap. So because this is a cap, this looks like a logical place to put a seam. So here I am inside of the object, and I'm just going to select a loop right here, and then fill the polygons on the inside. So I get my cap selected. Then, once I have that selected, I kind of want to tear it away in the UV space. But before I do that, I probably want to map it. So I'll do that as a flat map. Change it to flat, and then just make sure this is the correct orientation. So you can go to coordinates, and we can see that if we zero it out, it's pretty much in the right coordinate system already. But what we're really talking about is sort of imagining if it's there, and then that allows us to position it right there and start mapping. So tags, assign UV coordinates again. It's not going to affect the ones we already did because they're not selected. And that gives us this sort of shell. Now, we know that these polygons here on the surface are perfectly mapped. So I think it's pretty safe to just deselect those and relax everything else. What that does is allows everything else to spread out. If you're unsure about it, what you can do is you can select the inside parts here that we didn't have selected and relax those. So it's probably easier to select those using the polygon tool instead of the UV tool. So we can just select these faces and then grow the selection a few times. Go back to our UV mode and we have those selected. And if we relax those, you can see there was a slight change. So sometimes you can get an additional relax sort of movement even after you've done the initial relax on all of the polygons. And this is going to give us an interesting kind of mapping, sort of a shrink wrap mapping. The mapping is perfect if we look at it dead on like this, but it falls down the sides. It sort of slithers down the sides of the object. And this is fine for some kinds of objects. I'm not sure it's appropriate for a cylinder like this. You can see there's a fair bit of distortion happening, even considering that we're taking a grid and distorting it. There's still a bit of distortion. So, you know, I'd really leave it up to the artist to figure out if this is the kind of mapping that they want to show. In this case, I'm just going to leave it here for variety. I don't mind that it's distorted. It doesn't bother me. So I'm just going to set that aside next to our strip of polygons up there. And that leaves us the rest of this object. And this is where it gets interesting. So what we can do just to clean up our workspace a little bit is we can force the visibility of this on, then hide everything else. Like that. And we can even go further by selecting the parts that we've already mapped. And I have a shortcut assigned for those as well. For my semicolon, I have HIPU. So I can H for hide selected, and they just go away. And then I can hit semicolon P for hide, unhide all. I sort of think of it as previous, like go back to the parent state. And so that's a really cool way to just get stuff out of the way if you need to work. And we can see a lot better what we're dealing with here. Now, I'd mentioned earlier that I'm fine if there's a seam running along right here. And just for discussion's sake, let's try to unwrap it using a pattern kind of like this. So what I'm doing here is I'm drawing my cut lines. So I'm going to cut the geometry along this line as we do our mapping. So this may not be enough, but let's try it. So now we have these edges selected. We want to go to cylindrical mapping again. Go from the top view and sort of slide this around a little bit until it's, you know, roughly cylindrical relative to everything else. You want to make sure that it actually passes through the center of the object. Never hurts to scale it up just to make sure that you're not getting any strange mapping on any parts. And check where the seam is. Right now our seam is on the outside. It's the opposite side. We want it to be on the inside. And here's a cool trick. You can actually look at the UV view like this and you can kind of see what it's going to look like. So right here we can see that our seam is not in a bad place. You can actually view this in real time, I think. Like, I think if I were to open up another texture view, I'm not actually sure how to do that. I'm just going to tear this one off. Put it at the side. And you can say show UV mesh. I believe as I rotate this, you can see it move. You can sort of see where the seam is going to fall. As you rotate past a polygon, you see it comes in the other side. And that's what we don't want. We want to make sure it's all smooth on the edge like it is here. You can see the same thing happen with a few polygons up there. So I think this looks pretty good. I'm sort of envisioning this being unwrapped, and it's not awful. So let's see how that looks. So what we can do is select all these polygons. We don't have to be afraid of selecting the ones that are hidden. And then we can just say assign UV coordinates, and these go from being a preview to the actual UV coordinates. So we can put our texture view back on there. So the first thing I like to do is to sort of start straightening out the edges. That'll tell us what's going on and what parts of the mesh have a little bit of drama in them. So the top here looks pretty messed up, so I'm going to start there. I'm just going to select these, make sure pin to neighbors is turned on, and start relaxing it. So that looks alright. Then I'm going to do it to this bottom part here. Just going to select just this cap area and say relax. Now right away we can see that things are there's a lot of tension here because things sort of got messed up. And I almost feel sometimes like it's telling me where I need to cut, like right here. So if I were to select, I know we previously selected some edges for cutting, but because of the way we unwrapped the part using cylindrical mapping, we may not need to do that. So if I select those polygons, I can sort of zoom in on them here, and I can see that right here down the center it's sort of begging us to cut it right there. So let's try that. What we can do is select these edges. Let me come back to this view. And we know we have those edges selected, so we can get our rectangle selection again. And here we say cut selected edges, and we unfold again. So this time it sort of stretches out, much more relaxed. And we can just continue to select more of the geometry and sort of unwrap it gently. And as we do it, we're going to see the bias shift from one side to another. For instance, you may have seen a little bit of that happening right here as it's sort of evened out. And you know, we can just continue to select parts of it and unwrap only those parts until it sort of feels like there's less tension. Now, word of caution, this part might look really nice from the point of view of, oh, it looks like, you know, it looks really relaxed. It looks like it's UV unwrapped well. It may not be best for mechanical parts to be unwrapped in such an organic way. Part of the reason I'm doing it this way is just to mix it up. So as we go back to our camera view, we can sort of see, if we turn off the wireframe mesh, we can see that our UV texture goes smoothly from one edge over to the other. And we can see right here where it flares out. There's a little bit of distortion, but that's to be expected. We can get rid of that with HyperNurbs. And right here we can see our seam. So this is where our seam ended up, which is, you know, similar to where we wanted it. But one thing that happened that we didn't really count on was we got a seam on the outside right here instead of on the inside right here where we wanted it. So theoretically we could try to move that. I mean, right here is where it splits along this seam, so we wouldn't be able to move that as easily. But this vertical seam here, we can try to play with that a little bit. So that seam is basically here, where we cut it, and these two edges right here. If we select these two polygons, we can see they're right there. So if we were to join this all the way down, we may be able to sort of cap it off and try to cut it somewhere else. So let's see how we do that. If we go to point mode and select these points, let's try running the UV terrace command. I'm not sure it's going to work. I might need to switch to a different mode where I actually have that command because I'm not sure where it is. Here it is. So UV terrace. So it should have sort of joined everything back to where it was. So let's select these polygons again and relax them to see what happens. Like cut the edges because we had that selected. Okay, so it's relaxed it again, and it looks like we might have a second chance to decide where it gets cut. So these are all joined now and they look pretty awful. But maybe this time we can say where we want it to be cut. So I think if it was cut here it would be pretty nice. Right there on the inside. I'm not sure what that's going to do to the rest of it, but let's just see. So I've selected some edges. I'm going to turn on cut selected edges again. We hit apply and we get a much different shape here. It looks less clean from the perspective of UV mapping, but it might actually be better for the shape. So if we go back here, we can see that our seam now comes along the inside here where we wanted. It stops right there and it goes down, which is also what we wanted, but it continues a little bit over to the front. Maybe we can get it to not continue to the front. Let's try that. So I want it to only go sort of this far, so I'm just going to select those polygons as a guide. And if I go back to my texture view, I can see here what's happening. It's basically torn here, where maybe if it wasn't torn there, we wouldn't see that seam. So what we can do is use UV terrace again, and we can just select these points. So it's going to be 1, 2, 3 points, 1, 2, 3, and then we can hit UV terrace and it just stitches it up for us. And so if we select these polygons again, we can relax the UV, we can uncheck the cut edges, and we see something a little different. So if we go back to our camera view now, we can see that the seam starts here, goes up, makes a 90-degree turn, and then runs down the length of this object. And it turns out that's pretty much the only seam we have. We got kind of lucky in that we were able to cut the object seamlessly. Now, at a price, look at how much distortion we have up here. This is a pretty high amount of distortion, and it's undesirable. It's not great. It would probably be in our best interest to introduce some other cuts in this area just to relax that a little bit. So let's, you know, we're in tutorial mode. We're just messing around with this. So let's make some cuts and see what happens. So I'm thinking I wouldn't hate it if there was a seam that ran to about there. That wouldn't be so bad. So let's go back to the texture view and check the cut selected edges box and then hit apply. And so we get something that looks like that. So notice what we've done is we've moved the seam from down here to up here essentially. And it's much more relaxed. Granted, we do have a seam right here now, but we might be able to hide that with some scratches. Everything else looks a lot more relaxed and uniform though. So that's a good thing. Okay, next step is we unhide everything we hid before. So I'm going to go back to polygon mode and semicolon P, and I get my objects back. That semicolon shortcut is one of my own. I don't think there's any shortcut like that by default. And so, you know, it's at this stage of the game, it's not too late to run the relax command a few more times just to see what happens. Probably don't want to run it on that cylindrical strip we dealt with earlier because we know it's going to curve it. We don't necessarily want it to be curved. So sort of just make sure everything's nice and relaxed. And then we can just pack the UVs in. So we can go to optimal mapping, realign, equalize island size, and we just pack them in there. So, you know, the arrangement here isn't ideal, but I'm thinking about it, and we may actually want to arrange these UV shells for all of the arms on one giant texture map. That might make it a little bit easier when we're texturing all the parts. I'm not sure. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. We'll see when we get there. So what we have now is we have yet another part mapped. And this one started off pretty organic, and we sort of tried to maintain that theme, I feel like. And we gave it a really organic mapping treatment. We have a seam running around this cylindrical bit right there. And then we have a seam that runs right here on the inside where it's less visible, and it sort of cuts right here where we can hide it with some other scratches and stuff. And I think that looks pretty good. So now I'm going to restore the visibility to what it was before, and we can see we're getting more of the parts mapped. Now in the last video I said that you can just simply transfer a UV tag from one object to another, and I have to say I was under the impression that you could, but after some experimentation it seems a little bit hit and miss. I'm not sure what's up with it, but I tried it while recording last time and it kind of failed on me. I'm gonna try it again, but I'm not gonna make any promises. So I'm gonna put the texture tag on the other arm, and then I'm going to drag the UV tag over, and well, yeah, so it seems to work sometimes, just not every time. I'm not sure why it got sort of corrupted the last time I tried, but as you can see right there, it worked really well. This is what I've been doing for a while. Maybe one of you guys out there knows why this happens, or has like a tip that will make it more reliable, because I really like the ability to just drag the tag from one object to another. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and until next time, see ya.